morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. My name is Bailie, and I'll be your organizer for the session. And with me today is Richard Bailie. I have a short video I'd like to play just before handing over to our presenter.
Not knowing anything about electricity can be shockingly scary, especially when your work is affected by it. In celebration of Halloween, Articulate It offers a 10% discount on the Apex Consulting Earthing and Bonding for Water Heater Systems course. Presented by an accredited trainer, this course can help you become the Apex installer in your field. Visit www.iopsatraining.co.za to book your online course today.
Yeah, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to hand over to our presenter now.
Hi, morning, Byron. Thank you very much. Can you just confirm that you can hear me, please?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, excellent. Morning, ladies and gents. Byron, thank you very much. Byron had to call me awake this morning because I had forgotten that I am presenting a tech talk this morning, and that's and you will also notice that I'm going to be presenting something different to what was advertised because I had not got the correct one ready in time. So it's all on me, ladies and gentlemen. But it actually ties in quite nicely because what I am going to be talking about is managing expectations. So I'm just going to get this slideshow started. Byron, if you wouldn't mind, let me just try and share my screen here. There we go. Okay, let's see. Just confirm that you can see that, please, Byron.
Yeah, I can see your screen.
All righty, let's get that started. Okay, so what is managing expectations? And of course, to top it off, we've got load shedding here as well. So hotspotting. Expectations, I come across this sort of problem in the workplace with regards to the relationship between the service provider and the client on a daily basis. And it is one of the things that for me is the core of the breakdown of relations very, very often. I have done this tech talk before. Some of you might have attended it and you might have remembered that I've done it before. And I just wanted to sort of bring it a little bit or freshen it up a little bit in terms of current situations. We've all been experiencing load shedding recently. Now, load shedding is an incredibly well, it shouldn't be there. There's no sort of excuse for it. Let's put it that way. Yet we all become used to it, and sometimes, whether you'd like to admit it or not, sometimes you can expect the power to come back on at 8:30, for example, and it comes back on at 8:15, and you're pleasantly surprised. And right there is an example, a typical example of how the human being can become surprised or become pleased by not receiving a worse service than they expected, if that makes sense. So you and I as service providers are completely able to manage client expectations. And it's one of the things, as I said before, that I really and truly believe it's 100% under our control. And I promise you, it's one of the things that can improve relationships and improve the general outcome of a service provider / consumer relationship at the end of the day. So Terrell Owens said, if you align expectations with reality, you will never be disappointed. Just think about that. Just how often do we, and we'll get into it a little bit later because we're all people pleasers. So we all want to say, yes, no problem. And yes, of course I can get it done. But if you align somebody's expectations with the actual reality, then they will never be disappointed. That is such a powerful saying. So why manage expectations? So clients often expect more than can realistically be delivered. That is a given. Clients want the best for themselves. Clients want to pay the least and they want the best outcome. That is simply, in some cases, not the reality of the situation. You cannot pay peanuts and expect Rolls Royces. It simply doesn't work. So they often start out with a bad or an unrealistic expectation. The client may have been fed information which is not correct, and it could be from their neighbor, it could be from the uncle that used to work as a plumber, or whatever the case may be. And so now their expectations are misaligned, and they're expecting you to deliver something that realistically cannot be delivered. What will happen is that you will be seen to be underperforming. They'll look at you, they won't say, their adjustment in their minds won't be inward. It won't be, oh, I expected too much. They're never going to do that. They will always look at you outwardly and say, well, he is not performing to what my expectations were going to be. And so therefore you're not so lekker. You're a bad plumber, you're a bad service provider, etc. And it is a source of friction, and it's a source of frustration to both parties, because as soon as that sort of relationship starts to creep in, you have a little bit of friction, and it becomes a he said, she said, and he starts to ask, or they start to ask, well, how, why can't he just do what I'm paying him to do? I'm expecting him to build this, this shower like this. It's not coming out the way it was in my mind. And why can't he just do that? And you saying, well, how does he or she expect me to do that? How in reality am I expected to do, glass bricks floating without being supported by anything? So if you had managed those expectations and had sorted it out right at the beginning, the relationship would be there, the understanding would be there, and that friction, for a large part, would not be there. So realistic expectations make for better relationships. That's a given. It's always the case where you have got a realistic understanding with the client as to what can be delivered, what cannot be delivered. And if you want me to deliver that, Mr. Jones, well, it's going to cost X, Y, and Z. And if that understanding is there before you start the work, it makes for much better and smoother sailing. So there's some examples in plumbing. For example, if you're doing renovations, or if you're working on existing systems or existing services that were pre-existing, that were there before you, and you are hooking up to them in some way or form, you can't control the performance of what was already there. But the client doesn't always recognize that or know that. And nor should they, because they're not plumbers. So it is our job, and we're talking specifically about plumbing, it's our job to make sure that they do understand and recognize the fact that there are existing services, that there are existing problems. So we've got to do our due diligence. To go into a renovation, for example, and quote on a new bathroom, it's on the third floor of a block of flats, whatever the case may be, and you've got an existing stack system, you've got an existing water supply system and an existing hot water supply system, and you do not look at what those consist of, what is there, what the existing services are, and how it's going to affect the outcome of your final product. You're doing yourself a disservice. Not only doing a client a disservice, but you're doing yourself a disservice. The bottom line is that you as the service provider are saying to the client, I'm going to provide you with a brand new sparkly bathroom. And the client is expecting, because the bathroom renovation is total, you're gutting it completely. So the client is expecting everything to work perfectly. I'll give you another example within that same scenario. If, for example, the client is buying sanitary ware and tapware, and they're doing it on the cheap, let's just call it that, their expectations are still the same as they would have been were they to buy the most expensive top of the range taps, the sanitary ware from 5,000 Rand a pan kind of ranges. They would expect the things to be the same. They don't understand that there is a difference in operation in single lever taps between a 3,500 Rand mixer and a 750 Rand mixer. They don't understand that. They've got to be told that. So it's your job to have that discussion before you start the work. And you say to them, ma'am, sir, do you realize that this is what you are going to experience at the end of the day? This is going to be your experience. So, for example, existing waste systems could be blocked. They could have back pressure issues. If you're going to hook up bath wastes, shower wastes, basin wastes, etc., to an existing stack, which is got ventilation or back pressure issues, and you are being the pressure issues are influenced from flats, for example, above you or below you, or whatever the case may be. That's outside of your control. And so you need to identify that and show the client that this is in fact what could happen. For example, water piping as well. If you're going to be hooking up to a supply, whether it be cold or hot or both, and let's say it is undersized, let's say it is prone to water hammer, let's say it is almost on its last legs, and you know, we all know the scenario where you shut off water, work on pipes, put the pressure back on, and now all of a sudden you got leaks. And of course, it's your fault because you worked on it, so it's your fault. But in fact, that piping was going to do that regardless of who touched it and who did what. And the client is not going to understand that unless we manage those expectations. So these are the types of things that we're talking about, and these are the exercises that need to be done before you start that project to manage these things. We've come across it. I was speaking to Steve this morning. We've come across it so often in the complaints space within IOPSA and the PRB, where customer complaints come from all over, and they talk exactly about this. There is a dissatisfaction of the service that has been delivered. Yet when you scratch away at the surface and you get to the facts and you look at exactly what was delivered in terms of from a plumbing perspective and then from a client's expectation perspective, there's always a misalignment there. And that is the bottom line. There's always a misalignment. So another example is when installing, for example, a solar system or a heat pump system, whether it's new or a replacement or whatever the case may be, there is always this expectation of the client, because it's a massive outlay. If I'm going to give you 50 grand, I for sure as heck want something in return, something incredible in return. So now so you expect this thing to be absolutely like the most mind-blowing thing in the world. But if you have that discussion, and you say to them, okay, yes, it will do this, that, and that, but it cannot give you unlimited hot water. You didn't want to upsize it to that size. So 50% or 30% of the water you're using is going to be solar heated, and the rest is going to be electrically heated. And so when you have had that discussion and you in fact under promise and slightly over deliver, you have a very, very satisfied client. So amount of hot water, for example, from a gas geyser. How many times have I gone to a client's house in the gas geyser and they are bitterly disappointed in the fact that it's only giving them, 4 or 5 liters a minute, if that, and under winter conditions, maybe even a little bit less, and because they're expecting it to perform exactly like they had a high pressure geyser. Nobody explained to them the concept of delta T in a gas geyser. So now there's a big flow rate difference, and they didn't expect that. And it's a problem because they didn't have that discussion. So these are all tiny examples. Well, in fact, they seem like small details, but it's not such small details. You must understand that in a client's mind, they're paying good money to have these things done, and so they really and truly are expecting. They're expecting. It's almost like they're pulling a layer off an onion and starting with a fresh new leaf. They're expecting brand spanking, sparkly, shiny new stuff that works perfectly, and sometimes it's simply not realistic. Other examples are timeframes and schedules that you as a contractor may or may not be able to stick to. They have an expectation of timeframes, schedules, where they would expect you to be finished by X date, Y date, and you can't. Or there's something happened that you couldn't, or whatever the case may be. Costs. Another thing that isn't that from God's lips to everybody's ears. Everybody's worried about costs, and the client wants to pay as little as possible, and I want to be paid as much as possible. So when it comes to managing or delivering what the client wants physically for what they want to pay you, there's always going to be a discrepancy there. So, but there are ways around it. And again, we talk about communication, and communication for me is the key, and it is the thing that starts off that relationship, and it is the thing that will end off that relationship and make sure that it is a prosperous and a good one. Your capacity to be able to deliver. How many teams have you got? Have you got enough teams to carry on with the 3 jobs that you're busy with at the moment, plus finish this one on time? And if you don't, well, say so. You say, look, I can't finish it by next week or the week after. It's simply not going to happen. We can do it in 2 weeks or in another 3 weeks' time, or whatever the case may be. So these things you got to be honest with and upfront. So how do you manage these things? You got to be clear on your boundaries, on your abilities, on your capacity, etc. You got to be clear on that. So you've got to know where your boundaries are, and you've got to negotiate those boundaries into the contract, the agreement, the relationship at the beginning. It doesn't help to halfway through say to your client, you know what, I actually said I could do it by Friday. You know what, I said I was going to do reverse thermosiph on Thursday morning, and I didn't. I can't. That doesn't make for a good relationship. So perfect example of managing expectations. Request clarity from your client. For example, so let me just put that in a different way. It's not just simply up to you. It shouldn't all come from you to create this symbiotic relationship. It's got to come from their side as well. So they have got to give and take as much as you have got to give and take. You are doing a straight swap. I always used to say, ma'am, we're doing a straight swap. I've got something that you want and you've got something that I want. And we have agreed to swap these things. You've agreed to give me some of what you've got, the money, and I'm agreed to give you my services and a product at the end of the day. I don't owe you anything, and you don't owe me anything. It's a fair swap. If we had to put it on a scale, it weighs out. So you are not doing me a favor by paying me on time. That is not a favor. That is a requirement, and it is an expectation from my side. So let us put this now on the table. When will you pay me? I need to be paid on this day. That is not you doing me a favor. It is an expectation. It is a requirement. And you have those discussions. So it is a reciprocal relationship. And then be clear on the deliverables, on your deliverables, or whether it's yours or the installation's deliverables. So, ma'am, despite what you heard from your neighbor, this system will not be free hot water. You will have to top it up with some electrically heated hot water. So it's not 100% free. Or, no, this heat pump is not silent. You will hear it. It can cause an irritation. It can cause a drone, a resonance in certain rooms, and you might find it to be very, very irritating. So please bear that in mind when you're asking me to put this heat pump against this wall. Or, for example, the stack that I'm using is not vented properly, and this could cause smells to emanate from the basin. We can mitigate it by putting in a deep seal trap, for example, but understand that the existing stack that I'm connecting to is not correctly done. This is the result. And then you have pretty much taken the liability off your shoulders and well, you haven't placed it anywhere, but you've just explained to them what the reality of the situation is. And a very nice or good way to get yourself leveled and settled is to call a timeout. It's not a problem. You can say, if you're in a discussion or a meeting or a negotiation or a situation where you feel flustered, you feel pressurized, you feel as if things are not sort of going your way, you feel slightly bullied, call a timeout. Say, hang on a second. I'm just going to take some time on this. Can I take a day? Can I take 3 hours? Give me 5 minutes. I'm just going to have a smoke break, and I'm going to come back and we can discuss it further because I just need a timeout. That's okay. It's okay. Nobody can perform optimally 24/7. And if you need to just say, guys, ladies and gentlemen, or sir, madam, I'm just going to call a timeout. Let me just think about this for a day or two, and I'll get back to you on that. And if quite frankly, if that's something a reasonable client is not willing to understand or accept, well, I would question whether or not I want them as a client anyway. And then under promise to over deliver. That's a premise we hear all the time, but it is, and it's almost a cliche, but I don't know how many of us actually stop and think about it and put it into practice. And if you actually put it into it's let me say this, it's a very uncomfortable thing to do. I put it into practice as often as I can, and it's uncomfortable because you have to upfront say, I'm not sure if I can do that, which is not so lekker sometimes because you always want to please. So the key is you got to learn to say no sometimes. So what would it take for you to learn to say no? And consider and ask yourself the following questions. Are you guilty of saying yes to someone when you really want to say no? We've all done it. So just be honest. Yes, I've done it. I actually do want to say no to this, but I've said yes. Right? Well, there's a an amber flag, shall we say? Because we've got, we've already now placed ourselves under pressure. Do you find yourself wondering just how you allowed yourself to be roped into doing something and now you feel angry and resentful as a result? I'll stick my hand up again. We've all done it. We've all done it. There's a lovely Afrikaans saying in this country, ja broer. We are all ja broers. We all want to say, yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. Are you a people pleaser? More inclined to go along with what other people want rather than asking for what you want? I think that's a herd mentality. It's a human trait. It's nothing untoward. I think we all have that in us. There's one or two people that maybe have that very strongly and others less strongly, but we've all got that to some extent, and what we end up doing is, again, it's the expectations that are not managed right at the beginning. And then learn to say no without actually having to say no. So you don't have to say, no, I don't want to do it. You can say, for example, well, I'm currently working on this thing which I must finish by next week Tuesday, so I can do this for you after that. So you've said no to a deadline, but you haven't really articulated the word no. Or you could say, well, I could do it like that, but if I do it like that, it will be non-compliant, it'll be unsafe. And that's you've told them what the situation is, but you haven't really said no. I don't know how many of you know Dilbert. So here's a nice little cartoon. It says, "You're fired." Well, you can read gets a hell of a shock. He says, no, not really. But this is your 2% raise, and it won't seem so bad now that you thought you were being fired. You're not being fired anymore. And so he says it's all about managing expectations. And that's so true. It's a little 3 little blocks of cartoon, but it's so true. The guy thought he was going to get fired, and now he's not. His legs have been taken away from under him because now he's not in a position to complain about his 2% raise. So I think that's pretty much it, ladies and gentlemen. We're pretty much spot on time. I don't know if there are any questions, Byron. Well, there's not really questions, I suppose, on a subject like this, but one could always take comments, I guess.
There are a couple of comments here. We have, I have done this as per webinar and I've cut my loss extremely. And I have to say to the client, buy hardware. I also supply a hardware list and they buy what they want. So it is better that way.
Yeah. You provide a hardware list. You say to the client, this is what I want. This is what we need for the project. I hear you. I hear exactly what you're saying. And then they come back and they haven't done it. So again, I would question, well, what was the conversation or the discussion before you gave them that list, before you gave it to them, and you say to them, here's the list that I need. Now, let me tell you, if you don't follow this list, and if you miss this, and if you miss that, this is the list I need. Madam, you asked me to provide you with a list of stuff that I need. Here it is. Please don't go against this. Alternatively, let me go and buy it, and this is what it's going to cost. So, look, there's never going to be a perfect scenario, is there? It's just never going to happen. I mean, there's always hiccups, but the key is to try and manage it as best we can. So, and with any situation, even when it comes to them coming back from the hardware store with the wrong stock in hand, that in itself is a negotiation, and they need to understand the ramifications of what they're doing. They're wasting your time. You are incurring that cost, and they're putting themselves at a disadvantage in terms of performance because they come back with non-compliant materials. And these are the conversations and expectations you need to manage.
And then we have another one here that says architects often give the client a picture of what they want, especially on alterations, without knowing the depth of the waste pipes. Example, walk-in shower if flat on third floor. Slab cannot accommodate a walk-in, but arc think you can just fit. Explaining to the client this causes an argument.
Yeah, well, that last sentence for me is a problem, because then that client is a problem. If the client, the client, if I go in there and have that discussion with the client and point this out to them, and say, well, physics does not allow for water to jump up and flow upwards. It simply does not allow it. How am I supposed to overcome that problem? So it cannot be done. Now, if the client at that stage gets cross with me, well, then there's then I'm not 100% sure that I want that as a client, because if they are that unreasonable to understand or to think that it's my fault for the that physics is physics, it can't be done. So I don't quite know how to overcome an obstinate, unreasonable client like that. One, I suppose we always come across them. I, in my experience, have found that the easiest way to overcome those sort of situations is to give way, is to think of it as the client pushing you, and you standing in front of one another and pushing against one another, and you suddenly give way and say, okay, loss, and they will fall over flat in their face. And often that changes the perspective a bit. And you say, okay, look, I'm not going to force this issue. I'm tell you what, go and find a plumber that is able to manipulate the laws of physics and have fun with that. And because I can't, and I'm obviously not good enough to do this. And then see what the reply is.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't think there are any more questions. Anything you'd like to add, Steve?
Yeah, I think, Richard, also listen to your gut. How often have we gone, to a job and you just don't feel that it's right, exactly what you're talking about now with regards to a shower, whatever. And sometimes it's just easier to walk away. How many times I've gone to complain to or assist a plumber and he says, I should never have done this job. I should never have started this job. My gut told me that I shouldn't do this. So again, just bringing those things into perspective and managing those expectations. But being clear, being frank, being upfront. You're the professional. You're there to guide. And like you say, the laws of physics or whatever the case may be, but you need to bring it in and then just sometimes listen to your gut. Thank you, Richard.
Cool. No, I agree. 100%. Listen to your gut. It often is the most sensible thing out there. I would 100% agree with that. Thank you very much, Byron.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this morning, and have a blessed week.